All right, great. Well, welcome to the Destination Arte podcast. My name's David. Normally, my brother is here. Unfortunately, he is away on business, so he cannot be here today. But I am joined by the wonderful Emma Hartman, and I'm really excited. We've been trying to get this scheduled for over a year, and we're finally here, and it's going to be great. And I'm going to thank some other people along the way. But Emma, just maybe introduce yourself. We know your name, but tell us who you are and maybe something that you just finished working on, or a piece that you are working on, or whatever you want to tell us about your art.
Have to catch up all the way from our business office years. So it's been 10 years almost now?
Don't say that.
Okay,
but
it's been a while. So my name's Emma. I teach now at Bob Jones University, which is crazy to me. I teach painting, drawing. I got my master's in painting after I graduated from Bob Jones in 2015, so not that long ago. And I work now with religious contemporary paintings. So we're going to talk about contemporary art. That's what your questions were about. And so I've been making sure, just thinking through all of my career, how I got there. And I'm working on a continued series that I started in 2018, which is probably, I think, what most of the shows I've been in has featured that work. So even though I make a lot of different stuff, that's kind of what I talk about the most. It's what I think about the most. So I'm currently keeping up with a series of contemporary religious pieces, I guess is how I would describe it.
Yeah, that's great. I may or may not dig up the only picture of us from the business office days. There's one picture that we're both in from a Christmas party. I don't know if you remember this picture.
From Mrs. Root's house.
Yeah, it shows up a lot on social media.
With the bear rug. Yes, I remember.
Yeah, it's quite an infamous picture, but
yes.
But yeah, we go way back, and I think it was cool that we got to know each other before we both knew that we were creatively, Yeah. I knew you were an art major, but I wasn't following your work at the time. But I'm glad that it's been over a year since we decided to do this, because I feel like I've gotten to catch up on what your work is and what it means and the ideas that you're working through and working with. And what prompted me to invite you on was, I think you put up an Instagram story about this guy who uses just fluorescent, I'm going to say that word again, fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
And I don't remember his artist's name.
I mean, there are several artists who do work like that, very minimal. And it was from a series of questions of something that I was thinking about is, what questions or what fears do you have about contemporary art? So it was just me finding a lot of the pictures to go with the answers to keep people engaged. But it was usually the artwork, I think, that people are afraid of, I guess, is the best way to phrase it. So a lot of it was minimalist stuff, or what I just described as the weird stuff to go in that series, yeah.
Yeah, and coming from a conservative background myself, I'm just going to get it out there and say, you could call some of this modern art. I'm just going to say the words, and we'll get past it. And I know that...
You can call it that, the small m, modern art.
Yeah.
If it's the capitalized M, then we're talking about a very specific time period, which, some people are like, yeah, I already knew that. But a lot of people, especially, from our backgrounds, it's a whole foreign world, and so it all kind of sounds the same or is described the same way. So it could be called modern art. I usually use the phrase contemporary, meaning the stuff that people are making now that are still alive is, I think, the best way to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great too. And I think it's good for us to engage in it just because it doesn't look like what we're taught should be art maybe at one point in our lives.
Right.
We can engage with it still. And that's really kind of what my first question for you is what should my response be to contemporary art? Is there a response that I should have, or how should I be approaching it? Just from an initial, I'm encountering this.
Right.
How can I respond to it?
So I have been thinking about that question. There is both a really long answer where people have been writing books about it, and you can reference philosophers. You can get really into it. But I think really the short answer is we approach it the same way we approach everything else. And I think it kind of is relegated into its own thing, its own kind of sphere, where there's this fence around it that we've kind of put to keep people out of it, or there's a fear of something if we go too far, if we encounter too much of it. when really the same kinds of rules apply, I guess, or the same kind of frame set of mind applies for contemporary literature. You know, how do we approach that, or how do we approach movies right now? It's a very similar kind of way of approaching something, because I really don't think it's not evil in and of itself. The people who are making things, you know, us as humans, we're the evil ones. But there's also an immense amount of beauty in it. There's a lot of, I think, just a lot of fun. I think sometimes we're just afraid to have fun. A lot of curiosity, a lot of, I think, just really fantastic things out there that we just don't let ourselves even approach. So it's pretty much the same as anything else. You never want to just gravitate towards something wholesale, like without thinking. But I don't think it has to be approached in a fearful way either, I think would be how I would answer that one.
That's great. Yeah. So this is a whole can of worms, so I don't want to go there, but
do it anyways.
Do you bring this idea of maybe being able to redeem something out of it to it when you create? Or do you have that in mind? Or do you ever pray about that before you start? Or
I mean, it's kind of a big question, because I found myself in that world. I went to SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, in Atlanta, and we were all making, it's a very contemporary program, very postmodern, I guess, philosophically program. And I had found myself there through a series of steps that the Lord had led me very clearly to. And I found that I was good at it, and I enjoyed it. So I was already making work in that place. And I guess I found myself wanting so much to talk about my faith. And I didn't let myself do it while I was there. And I even had professors who are not Christians who are like, I feel like you should talk about your faith in your work. Like, it seems really important to you. You should make some work about it. And I refused. I didn't do it until I graduated. And I realized I loved that contemporary way of working. And I finally felt like I actually needed to make work about my faith. And so it wasn't something that I think was so premeditated in that I'm going to try to redeem this postmodern art world. It was, I'm already making work. I'm already here, and it's going to be about my faith. And so it just kind of came in, I guess, more of that kind of backdoor that way. So it wasn't too premeditated in it's going to be redeemed. But, you know, when I was at SCAD, there were Christians there. There weren't very many. There was like a handful. And they were making incredible work, too. And so I don't think it has to be redeemed as much as we think it needs to. I think there are a lot of Christians who are already there working. We just don't necessarily know about them as much.
Well, we should get to know them.
Yeah, they're out there.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. That makes me very excited. I love that. I love that answer. I don't have anything to add to it. I think that's amazing. So, but it really helps me transition to the second kind of big idea, which is just like, as a believer, what attitude should I have? You kind of touched on it a little, but like, what are some specific attitudes that we find out someone that we know is an artist, or we meet an artist and their art looks, you know, contemporary, and it has themes in it that we recognize. You know, if you look at Emma's work, you can recognize the themes if you've read your Bible, or, you know, if you look at her captions and that sort of thing, or you look at the titles of the pieces. So, like, what are some attitudes we can bring that will be healthy, I think? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think curiosity in and of itself, approaching something with curiosity takes anxiety out of the question. And I think whenever we are approaching, and I say we from like coming from a Christian background, are approaching artwork, there's already an anxiety of, I need to know what this means immediately. I have to have the right answer. And I think that's how most people feel when they go to museums anyways. Like, I'm too afraid to comment on any of the stuff I see around me because I'm not qualified, or like or people feel secretly like dumb when they walk in, when really you can just approach something with your honest thoughts. And I think most artists want people to do that, even if they're not from an artistic background, even if this looks like the weirdest thing you've ever seen. Usually if you're honest with what you see, with your reactions, it's going to be pretty close. And I think one of the few really wonderful things about postmodern art is that you can make that call. You can bring your own experiences to it. So if it's something you don't understand, if it's something that's super weird, you can say that. Like, just be honest with it. And I think that brings a lot of the anxiety down, and then you can really engage with it. And when I talk to my students, my freshmen coming in, and I have them all the way usually through senior year, we talk a lot about how to engage with art. And it is a process, but we can really engage with anything, like really anything. So I think if you have that attitude when you're walking up next to something, to artwork that is weird to you, or you have questions about, you can ask those questions. Artists are usually not people who get too offended about like real honesty and interest when it comes to their own work. So I think the approach is more curiosity than it is anxiety, and that would at least be a good first step, I should think.
Yeah, and this is a question for follow-up that I really want to know the answer to. You say the word postmodern, and a lot of times we get this idea that postmodern means there are no rules.
Right.
So are there rules to postmodern art, and is it like any other art venture where you have to know the rules well enough to know when you can break them, or are there no rules and it's just whatever you feel like doing?
So that's the hard thing about art, is art itself is such a huge thing that people don't realize. And I think first approaching it, you think every artist is trying to do the same thing, which usually if you don't have too much background in it, automatically the thought is symbolism. So you come to like a museum and you think everything's trying to be symbolic. So you might understand the stuff that's realistic, but when it gets, too outside of your zone, or just fluorescent lights on a floor, it's like, well, I don't know what the symbolism is. I don't know what they're trying to say. When really, art itself, the way it's progressed through history is you were making a certain type of work, and whether or not it was accepted by the people who were buying work, you had to make it a certain way. So we have like the Academy in Paris, right? You had to make these historic pieces for the most part. And then it has moved through time. If you wanted to be an artist in the 1950s in America, you would want to be in New York probably, or a really big city, and you wanted to make artwork that didn't really resemble anything, because that's what was accepted at the time. Not that there weren't artists making lots of other things, but if you wanted to be the accepted art form, you made it this way. And then we moved to postmodernism, which I think, even though philosophically I can't agree with everything, in the art world, what happened is now it was every single person was going to make art according to their own ideas. And the measure of success was whether or not you reached those ideas. And there's a lot of freedom in that. But the hard thing is now you have to know what every different artist is doing. So yes, there are rules in that in postmodernism, you usually have to have a body of work that's centered around an idea. But there aren't rules in the sense that that idea can be anything. You could make 17th century like reproductions of Dutch paintings if you wanted to and get really into it, and that's your work. Or you could make like sound art. It's just sound, and you step into a room and you listen. So it can be anything, but for the most part, to be part of the accepted like galleries in museums, you want to have that idea, even if your idea is to be against postmodernism and try to do something else. That's still really an idea in and of itself. Interestingly, I think that's kind of moving away. I think now to be accepted, the ideas probably need to be a little bit more political, or a little bit more political justice driven, which isn't always a terrible thing either, but it is interesting that kind of art world mentality of we decide now who's going to be on the front page is going away from postmodernism to a certain extent. But yes, there are rules, and yes, there aren't rules at the same time. And what's hard is that you really have to decide how much of the artist's perspective you want to know. And I think that's what's difficult for people, is they feel like if they don't have the whole story, they can't look at it at all, or they can't engage with it at all, when that's really not the case, to give you a long answer.
No, that's wonderful. I could talk to you about that forever.
Yeah.
That's great. And I think that when an artist has done the work, like I was thinking about sound, like sound designer, or like John Andrews.
Yeah.
You know, his work stands out because he spent so much time developing that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you have put in 4 years of school, 2 more years for grad school. Like, you've put in the time to develop this style. It's not just whatever I feel like drawing today. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you were talking about earlier, sometimes we can encounter art and we don't understand it right away and we don't go further.
Right.
You know, and I think that kind of leads to my third question, which is like, I don't want to poison the well by leading with that. What's an area we should avoid when we encounter contemporary art? And it can be, you know, is there an attitude? Is there an action? Is there a belief system? Is there a thought process? Like, what do you think is what's your answer for that question?
I think I'm going to have to go with an idea that I think it was Francis Schaeffer's, to be honest, in that, and I touched on it earlier, we don't ever want to accept something wholesale. You never want to look at work without thinking that there isn't intention, because there is. But I think completely cutting ourselves off from it is doing us more of a disservice than it is helping us or keeping us away from the harmful things. Because there are definitely harmful things out there. There's whole genres of art that my contemporary art history professor at SCAD refused to show us. And he showed us a lot of things. But he was like, I can't in good conscience show you some of these things. So there's definitely things to like completely avoid genre-wise. But I think a lot of the time when I told people I was going to SCAD or that I was focusing on painting, contemporary painting, I think there was a lot of suspicion and fear in that when there really isn't a need for it. And it's such a mission field too. Like, you can have so many worthwhile conversations just by being there that I think it does us as Christians more of a disservice to say, no, we don't want to send our kids into that field. Whoever controls the culture controls society, you know, so we really should be encouraging, I think, a lot of kids to go into the contemporary art field, but with, you know, preparation. So I think it's the same way as approaching it. I would be wary of one extreme reaction on either side of, no, I can't look at it, I can't engage with it because it is evil, or I'm just never going to think about it, because that can be kind of insidious over time too. So I think that's really the attitude I would avoid on that.
Are you grateful for the Christian Liberal Arts Foundation before SCAD, or do you think you would have been fine like flopping it?
Yes, I'm very thankful for, and I think it was a lot of things that I didn't expect to be thankful for. I was very thankful for our themes in Western thought class, knowing a lot of the philosophy, because people know their philosophy. Artists know their philosophy, and you better know who Sartre is. Like, I was very thankful, at least I could keep up with a lot of these conversations, and I was very thankful that I knew how to draw. As stupid as that sounds, it's kind of a rarity, and I don't think it's required necessarily to be an artist, but there's so much more freedom in that. So I was really thankful that I had both of those sides. But I did feel like I had a lot of that fear when I got into SCAD, that I didn't know really how to engage with people. And I think that's because I really wasn't too familiar with that kind of working. I think from my background, that liberal arts education, there was still a lot of people who were fearful of, like, you could be an illustrator, or you could maybe be a designer, but you didn't want to be like a fine art painter unless maybe you're just doing landscapes. You know, like, there was a certain level that I wish I had more conversations around. And the few conversations I did have with, like, Michelle Radford were so helpful, but I wish I had more of that, because it was still very hard for me to engage with a lot of people. because there was like this knowledge gap that I didn't have, and I kind of had to slowly learn, and was really the whole reason I decided to come back to teach, because I kept thinking like, man, I wish somebody had taught me this. Like, I wish somebody had discussed this with me. So I'm incredibly grateful for it. And there are also a lot of things that I wish I had learned at the same time.
Talk about just overcoming fear as an artist.
Yeah.
Like just creating things, like overcoming your own fears of creating, and then overcoming the fear of creating in that environment. Like, that had to be just a jam-packed, like, psychological, mental, spiritual, like.
God was so good to me. And I really felt like I got to know him, but he also knows what he's doing. And there was another Christian, he was a sculpture major, and I wish I could remember his name. I was trying so hard to think of it on the way over here. I just remember it was Matt. And he was a very strong Christian, and I learned more about how to engage in that world from just watching Matt. And I don't even think, like, I probably had maybe 2 conversations with him, but we had a lot of classes together, and I watched him, and I learned how to exist in that world from really just watching Matt's testimony. So it was a lot at first, and my whole thesis was around the word uncomfortable. So that tells you a lot about where I was at those 3 years. But I do feel like I could make it through because I had just the right people around me, and I don't think that was a mistake either. So it wasn't as psychologically breaking as it could have been. So I think it really showed God's providence while I was there too.
Hey everybody, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Emma's about to answer a ton of listener questions, and I wanted to give you guys an idea of how you can participate this in upcoming episodes. We usually post on our Facebook and Instagrams about 24 hours before we conduct an interview and give you a chance to submit questions for our guest. We have lots of people that submit questions, and we can't always ask every single one of them because our guest time is precious. But this week, Emma was able to answer all of them. And so you can be part of this in the future if you follow us on Facebook or like us on Instagram at Destination Arete, Arete. As I mentioned, you'll see in our stories about 24 hours ahead of time and get a chance to submit your questions if your favorite artist or someone that you admire is being interviewed. You should also send us an email, destinationarete, Arete, @gmail.com. That puts you on our mailing list. We do not sell your email to hackers or spammers. What we will do is send you reminders about episodes that we've released, sneak peeks at content we're making. When we secure a new podcast guest, we'll send you a notification in there too. And then you'll also get to be the first to find out about possibly t-shirts, possibly more content, possibly community activities coming in 2022. So if you want to be part of that, destinationarete@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get back to Emma answering our listener questions from this week's episode. Okay, well, this has been everything that I hoped it would be and more. I'm so excited that we're doing this. We're going to I'm just going to like schedule you monthly, so just
that
be
works
prepared.
for me. That'll be fine.
I'm kidding, but it would be fun. Okay, so our audience has several questions for you, and I'm excited to hear them. First of all, I think a big one from David is just, not me, but our listener, David. What artists inspire you? And maybe like your top 2 or top 3, and then maybe what is it about them that inspires you?
Yeah, so it's kind of all over the place for me with religious art. Hieronymus Bosch is the greatest. And it was actually very comforting to me because when you work with religious art, there is a lot of worry of how are people going to take this? And there's so much control that you have to release. But there's also, the worry of like, well, is this going to read wrongly? Like, or is this going to be something that maybe I don't want people to think about angels in this way or something? Like, there's a lot more theological repercussions. But Bosch did not care. Like, I mean, he was a very religious man, very, I think, pious. And if you look at his paintings, they are crazy. Like, they're absolutely insane. And art historians think he would just sit in the church and he would wait for people to come look at his altarpiece and, like, wonder what he was trying to say so that he could step up and, like, talk about it. So I think I'm really inspired by his work because there was that kind of lack of fear while still being like a very honest to his thoughts person. And I think when I'm working with my own paintings, most of the time if you see religious iconography in contemporary art, it's with a cynical view. So trying very hard to make sure that I have something that's authentic. So I think about his work a lot. There's Lauren Eldricht. Her handle on Instagram is OKLauren. And she's not a believer, but she is making some incredible work. And it's work that has that technical, like, strength to it, but you might not see it unless you're also a trained artist. And so the thought that she's making work that is just so good without, I guess, playing to the crowd, like feeling like she has to show off, like she knows it's good. And that comes through. And I'm really inspired by that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll go look those up because I think I've heard of the first guy, but maybe not like really looked into.
Well, the
it.
Garden of Earthly Delights. I don't know if you remember that
yes,
one.
Yes, I do know about that one.
That's his.
Cool.
Some good
Cool.
stuff.
Okay. All right. Have you ever considered, this is from Egbert. I don't know if you know who Egbert is.
Yes, I do.
Have you ever considered painting the 7 works of mercy?
So Egbert Moderman is also a religious painter. There's a very small community of us Christian painters who are making work about Christian themes in an authentic way and still in a contemporary way. So we kind of know each other online. So Egbert Moderman is in the Netherlands, and he just won the BP Portrait Award, I think, last year. So, like, he knows what he's doing. Yeah. And his church is a Protestant church in the Netherlands. So if you think back to Zwingli of Zurich, how they didn't want any artwork, right? So his church didn't have any paintings, and they commissioned him to make these paintings, the 7 works of mercy, as like the first paintings in the cathedral. And if I've gotten that wrong, Egbert, you can't correct me. So that's what I've come to understand is the truth in that one. And they're just phenomenal, and they're gigantic paintings. So I wish I had the ability to do that, but I do not. So that's all just Egbert Moderman's work.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm so excited I asked you that question.
Yes.
Okay, Charlotte wants to know what inspired your interest in painting the apocalypse. If you don't know Emma's work, we'll definitely share with you where to find her in a minute, but you do a lot of work with just like ideas from Revelation, ideas from the Old Testament prophets talking about the desolation that will
the
come,
end of the world,
the judgment,
yes.
you know.
So to give some backstory, I lived through the, what was that book series in the 90s of the Rapture?
Yeah. Left Behind?
Left Behind. I lived through the Left Behind era, and it scared me. And I had like anxiety for so long. I did not read Revelations until I was well into my mid-20s. Like I just couldn't. It was terrifying to me. And it was always kind of used as a threat, I guess. Like, as Christians, we're always looking out for the end times, but it's not like praise God. It's like, it's coming. Like, we're going to suffer. Like, you better be ready. So there was a lot of fear behind it for the longest time. And my church, I think it was like 2 years ago, did a book study, like Bible study through it. So I couldn't avoid it. I was going to church. I was there. And we were reading through it, and it was so hopeful. Like, it was not used as a threat. It was used as I guess, something to look forward to, a reward. And also the images were right up my alley. Like, so many things that really can't be explained. And I think that's what I really love to make work for, is the stuff that, like, how do you really portray this? And it really got me thinking in that light. And the idea of real justice, I guess, is something that was missing. And the whole purpose behind suffering. I think it's a suffering that is short-lived, but there's purpose to it. It's not ever meaningless as well. So all of those ideas combined, I just kept drawing it, and I kept painting it. And for me, it was a terrible thing, but it's terrible and hopeful. It's like this combination of things that is all throughout, like, a lot of Old Testament prophecy as well. that kind of meeting of those two truths. So I started nonstop painting it, and it was almost a joke that I would try to paint something else, and then it would just turn into like the end times, and it just came like a trope for me. So I think the painting that she's referring to specifically was called Apocalypse, the Revealing, because that's what Revelations means. That's what Apocalypse means. It's a revealing of something. Some of the images are from one of my favorite artists, Giotto, and some of the images are just, some of them are Klaus Sluter's The Mourners of Dijon, which are some of my favorite sculptures of all time. But the idea of mourning, the idea of destruction, but also of redemption, of real justice, of perfection coming. I think it was just all those ideas at the same time. Yeah.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
To give you the really long answer.
No, that's great. That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte, for the question. So I have one more question for you from our listeners, from your good friend Paul. And Emma introduced herself a little bit at the beginning, but she's also involved with a group of local artists. And I'll let you share all of your Instagram handles here in a minute. But Paul wants to know, what do we need more of in this area in Greenville from contemporary art? He's curious to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so he is also part of the collective, the Greenville Contemporary Collective. And we kind of got started because our work didn't necessarily fit with Greenville. And not necessarily in like a critical way. It was just that there's artists, amazing artists who were making a lot of work, and it felt like there were only certain kinds of work you could make to show. So we started just meeting in the basement of Leaf Institute to start showing work. And since then, we've had a lot of other places in Greenville open up that shows very similar work. But what we were looking for was something that maybe was a little bit more outside of the Southern church kind of wheelhouse. I usually just tell people, like, it's the weird stuff. It's the stuff that, like, it might not necessarily sell, but it's stuff that people are really excited about making at the same time. And usually, a lot of us have also gone to grad school as well and have a lot of bodies of work that we'd already make too. So I think we've kind of addressed what I wanted to see, obviously, because I'm a part of that. But I think in general, as Greenville grows, what we need are more artists who are just excited about what they're making, like just really into it. We've had a lot of generations of cynical artists, and I think the next big thing is going to be artists who really care about what they're making. So as long as Greenville has artists who care, I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, Emma, well, thank you so much. Tell us about where to find you, where to find the collective, and then where to find work of yours that maybe we could have ourselves.
Sure. I will try to remember all of these handles. For me, Instagram is where I usually post most of my stuff. I do have a website, which is emmahartmanstudio.com. But Instagram has, like, if I make something, it'll be there. And that's Emma_Hartman. And you can also see in the bio, it says Greenville Contemporary. So we'll post whenever we have a show coming up, which we have 2 in one night coming up in September. So Casey Christmas Beach is going to be showing here, as well as Paul Walters is going to have a solo show downstairs. And you can find all the updates on that there. Also, if you follow Leaf Institute, Michelle Radford is an amazing artist and teacher. Helps, and she does run all the art really outreaches for Leaf Institute. So if you follow Leaf, they'll also keep you updated with lots of different art happenings around. And then I also have several pieces that are represented by a gallery called Povos in Chicago. So if you follow them at Povos, it's Povos. They're just now getting started. They really started a year ago, but COVID messed everything up. They're just like a great group. Luca is the artist and curator there, and he's just like a great guy who cares about art. So several of my pieces are represented by him as well.
And you have Yes-Its for sale?
Oh, yes. Small works I sell at it's just its own page. It's yes_its for sale. So yes, just small things if you want to buy stuff. Yeah.
Okay, Emma, thank you so much. I want to quick say thank you to Leaf Institute, where we are, for letting us use their building here on a Tuesday night. I want to thank my associate producer, Tabitha Burrell. I want to thank Jordan for shooting us. And then I want to thank our producer, Ethan Hansen, for coming out again and running the show. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I hope we can just, as a brand, just really invest in the art community where we are, both here and down south in Florida, and just like encourage it, see it grow, and see what can come of that. And I think you'll be a big part of this art community going forward, just because of how authentic you are. Like, if people follow you on Instagram, which they should, you care very much about the accurate representation of biblical angels.
Thank you. My biblical angel meme collection is on Instagram as well, so you want to make sure you follow for that.
Yeah, but it's because of what you've talked about all this whole time, is like, you care about what you're making, and I'm really glad that you overcame those fears maybe that you faced at the beginning of your time at SCAD. And I think the Lord has times in our life, and that time taught you a lot, and I'm excited just to see as you grow and follow you along. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Once again, go follow Emma _Hartman on Instagram. Follow us at Destination Arte, ARETE. Mark and I will be back in 2 weeks with another interview. See you then.